Hi, I'm HIllman. I'm with Marketplace Leaders, and I want to tell you a little story about what God is doing in the marketplace today and how it relates to you. In the Old Testament, we see a story with Moses. And Moses, as you know, he has been working for Pharaoh most of his life. He's been banished now for 40 years in the desert. And all of a sudden, he has an experience with God. That voice comes through the burning bush. And all of a sudden, after some initial discussions with God, he asked him a very important question. And that question was, Moses, what is that in your hand? And Moses said, a staff. Now that staff represented something very unique. It represented Moses' vocation as a shepherd. And then God asked him another question, which he responded after he told him that it was a staff. He said, I'm going to perform miracles through your staff. Now that staff represented his vocation as a shepherd. And God was saying to him, I'm going to use that staff to perform miracles through your life. And he told him to lay that staff down. And that was the first thing he had to do, is lay that staff down. Now a staff for a person in the Old Testament as a shepherd represented much more than just a stick. It represented their life, their livelihood. And so what God was saying to Moses said, I want to take that represents your livelihood, your work, and I'm going to use it for His glory. I'm going to use it to bring a people out of slavery, people that were in bondage to sweat and toil. And so many people in the workplace today are living a life of sweat and toil. And so today, God is doing a unique work in men and women. But in order to really see God's purpose in and through our work life, Moses had to do something. He had to change his perspective about his own work life. And one of those perspectives was that he had to lay that staff down. When he laid that staff down, he picked it up. And when he picked it up, it says it was no longer Moses' staff, it was the staff of God. And God began to use that staff to perform miracles and bring a people who were in slavery out of slavery. And that is what God is doing today. He is speaking to people all over the world to say that, look, your faith life and your work life is no longer to be separated. It's to be integrated. And so God is using men and women all over the world to bring Christ into the very area where they spend 60 to 70% of their time. God is moving today. He's speaking to a remnant that's been very silent. I believe what God is doing is He's changing this 80-20 rule from 20% of the people involved in ministry to 80%, where we're beginning to see how our work lives can actually be agents for transformation in our workplaces, our cities, and even nations. And God is doing this. And so I want to invite you to really reconsider how you're thinking about your work life. You know, it says in Colossians 3 that whatever you do, do for the glory of God, and that there's an inheritance in that very thing that you do every day. And so I want to invite you to really think about that God has called you to really impact your work, to be an instrument of righteousness and integrity, and to even experience signs and wonders in your own life. God will give you the strategy to succeed in work. He'll show you new ways of doing things. And so we live in an exciting time where God is moving dramatically in the workplace. And I believe part of the reason for that is that we're in the end times. And as God raises up His body to have an end time move, it's going to be through men and women in the workplace, because those are often the places that have spiritual authority. So I want to just leave that with you today and encourage you to think differently about your work, because your work does matter to God.